Before we begin tonight, I want you to get comfortable, really comfortable, because we're about to visit a time when comfort didn't exist. A time when simply waking up required courage, when breakfast could poison you, and when the most dangerous thing in your life wasn't war or plague, but the water you drank each morning. Tonight, we're traveling to the year 1325, deep into what historians call the High Middle Ages. But there's nothing high about where we're going. If you enjoy these long-form journeys into history, feel free to subscribe, but only if you genuinely find value here. No pressure. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's awake and who's drifting off around the world. Now, dim your lights. Let the screen glow softly. Maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum. And let's step backward through 7 centuries into a world that would break most of us within a single day. Welcome to medieval Europe. You're not going to enjoy your stay. Chapter 1. Waking up in 1325. Congratulations. You've just opened your eyes in the early 14th century. The first thing you notice isn't the light, or the cold, or even the smell, though we'll get to that in a moment. The first thing you notice is the itch. It starts at your scalp and radiates downward, a creeping, persistent sensation that tells you something is living in your hair. Something, plural, actually. You're lying on what passes for a bed, a wooden frame supporting a sack stuffed with straw, hay, and quite possibly the dried droppings of whatever barn animal donated the filling. There are no springs, no memory foam, no Egyptian cotton, just rough fabric, poking stems, and the accumulated body oils of every person who slept here before you. The blanket on top of you is wool, thick, heavy, and unwashed since sometime last winter. It weighs on your chest like a damp animal, because, in a sense, that's exactly what it is. You try to stretch, but immediately stop. The air is frigid. Your single-room home has walls made of wattle and daub, a charming medieval term for sticks, mud, and hope. The roof is thatch, which means it leaks when it rains, harbors mice year-round, and occasionally drops insects onto your face while you sleep. The floor beneath your bed is not wood. It's dirt, packed down by years of foot traffic, mixed with straw, animal waste, and whatever your family tracked in from the fields. There are no windows, or if there are, they're covered with cloth or greased parchment, because glass is a luxury reserved for cathedrals and castles. The only light comes from the dying embers of last night's fire, glowing faintly in the center of the room. You blink and realize you are not alone. Your entire family is here. Parents, siblings, possibly a cousin who arrived 3 months ago and simply never left. Everyone sleeps in the same space because the concept of a bedroom hasn't been invented yet. Privacy is a fantasy. You also share this space with livestock. In many peasant homes, goats, chickens, or pigs lived indoors during winter months to conserve heat and protect valuable animals from theft. So, the smell you're now fully registering? That's a symphony. Unwashed human bodies, animal musk, fermented grain, smoke residue from the fire, mildew, and something underneath it all that you can't quite identify, but instinctively know is decay. You're 22 years old. In medieval terms, that makes you middle-aged. Your back aches. Your knees crack when you move. Your joints protest like old wooden doors swollen with moisture. This isn't because you're out of shape. It's because you've been working since you were 5, hauling water, tilling soil, lifting stones, bending, kneeling, and carrying loads that would make a modern physical therapist weep. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell begins to ring. It's the medieval alarm clock, and it is profoundly unsympathetic to your exhaustion. The bell dictates the rhythm of your day: when to wake, when to pray, when to work, when to stop. You have no say in this schedule. The bell rings. You obey. So you sit up, or try to. Your head swims, your stomach growls, your skin itches, and your day, somehow, has only just begun. Around you, others are stirring. Your father groans as he stands, his spine making sounds like green wood snapping. Your mother is already moving toward the fire, coaxing it back to life with dry twigs and what little kindling remains. A younger sibling whimpers, still half asleep. The chickens, if you have them, begin clucking near the corner where they nest. This is morning in 1325. No snooze button, no coffee, no warm shower waiting. Just cold air, aching bodies, and the certain knowledge that today will be exactly as hard as yesterday, and tomorrow will be no different. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed, and your bare feet touch the floor. It's damp. You're not sure if it's from condensation, a roof leak, or something the goat did. You decide not to investigate further. Outside, the world is still dark. Dawn hasn't arrived yet, but the bell has spoken, so you rise. Because in medieval Europe, your body is not your own. It belongs to the rhythm of the church, the demands of your Lord, and the endless cycle of survival. And right now, survival means getting out of bed, even if every part of you wants to stay under that rancid wool blanket forever. Chapter 2. The bathroom situation. 8 to 1600. You're awake now. Your body, predictably, has needs. Specifically, your bladder is staging a quiet revolt, and your intestines are sending urgent messages that cannot be ignored. In the modern world, this is a non-issue. You walk 10 feet to a private bathroom, flip on a light, and handle your business in climate-controlled comfort. In 1325, this is an adventure, and not the fun kind. Let's start with the basics. There is no toilet. No porcelain throne, no flush mechanism, no soft paper on a roll. Not even a particularly uncomfortable outhouse with a door that closes. What you have, if you're lucky, is a wooden bucket. It sits in the corner of your home or just outside the door, depending on how much your family values fresh indoor air. This bucket is communal. Everyone uses it. Your parents, your siblings, that cousin who never left. By morning, it's usually half full, or more than half full, depending on how much weak ale everyone drank the night before. The smell is immediate and aggressive. You approach it with the resignation of someone who has no other option, because you don't. You do your business quickly, trying not to breathe too deeply. And then comes the next step, disposal. In many medieval towns, the standard procedure was to carry your bucket to the nearest window or door and toss the contents into the street. Yes, the street. Some cities had regulations requiring you to shout a warning first. In parts of Scotland and England, people yelled something close to gardy, likely derived from the French garde l'eau, meaning watch out for the water. Except it wasn't water, and people didn't always shout. So walking down a medieval street, especially in the early morning, was a gamble. You might be minding your own business, thinking about bread or prayer, when suddenly you're drenched in someone's midnight collection. Streets, particularly in urban centers, functioned as open sewers. Waste, both human and animal, flowed through channels, collected in puddles, and baked in the summer sun. In some towns, pigs were allowed to roam freely, acting as organic waste disposal units, which sounds efficient until you realize you're also eating those pigs. If you live in a town with public latrines, you have another option. These were communal structures, often just wooden benches with holes cut into them, positioned over a pit or a flowing stream. Privacy? Forget it. You sit elbow to elbow with strangers, all of you engaged in the same deeply personal act, making small talk or avoiding eye contact depending on your personality. The smell in these places is biblical. Ventilation is poor, flies are abundant, and the pit below fills slowly over months, creating a fermenting reservoir of human waste that, in some towns, had to be manually emptied by workers called gong farmers. These individuals, often working at night to avoid public disgust, would climb down into cesspits and shovel the contents into carts. It was one of the worst jobs in medieval society. It also paid relatively well, because no one else wanted to do it. Now, if you're wealthy, if you live in a castle or a manor house, surely things are better. Slightly. Castles often featured garderobes, small closets built into the thick stone walls with a shaft that dropped waste directly outside. Sometimes these shafts emptied into a moat, sometimes into a cesspit that had to be cleared periodically, and sometimes, horrifyingly, into a river or stream that other people downstream used for washing or drinking. But here's where it gets truly medieval. These waste shafts were also structural vulnerabilities. There are documented cases of attackers scaling castle walls by climbing up through the guardrobe shafts. Imagine defending your fortress only to discover enemies emerging from the latrine, covered in filth but very much armed and motivated. So even in the safety of a stone castle, your toilet could be a security risk. Back in your peasant hut, you've finished with the bucket. You wipe yourself with whatever is available. Straw, if you have it. Leaves, if it's summer. Old rags, if your family has spares. Moss, in a pinch. Sometimes just your hand, followed by a rinse in cold water, assuming water is nearby. Toilet paper won't be invented for centuries, and even when it is, it won't reach common people for much longer. You set the bucket down and step outside into the pre-dawn gloom. The air is cold and damp. You can hear other families stirring, other buckets being emptied, other lives beginning their daily struggle. And you think, just for a moment, about how much you took for granted in the world you came from. The privacy, the hygiene, the fact that human waste was something you never had to think about. Here, it's unavoidable. It's on the streets. It's in the air. It's part of the landscape. And there's nothing you can do but accept it and move on. Because the day is just beginning, and you still haven't eaten. Chapter 3. Breakfast in the Dark Ages. Your stomach is growling now. You've been awake for maybe 30 minutes, and your body is reminding you that it needs fuel. Unfortunately, fuel in 1325 is a grim affair. Let's start with what you won't be eating. No Eggs Benedict, no avocado toast, no yogurt parfait with granola and fresh berries, no coffee, no orange juice, no buttered croissant. In fact, no butter at all, unless it's a feast day, and even then, it's rancid. What you will be eating is pottage. Pottage is the backbone of the medieval peasant diet. It's a thick, sludgy stew made from whatever grains, vegetables, and legumes your family managed to grow or barter for. Barley, oats, peas, beans, onions if you're fortunate, turnips if you're not. The pot sits over the fire, and new ingredients are added daily. Nothing is ever thrown out. Nothing is wasted. So the pottage you're eating this morning has been simmering in some form for days, possibly weeks. The bottom layer is a mystery. It's been there so long it's achieved a texture somewhere between porridge and clay. Your mother ladles a portion into a wooden bowl and hands it to you. It's lukewarm, grayish-brown, and has the consistency of wet cement. You eat it anyway, because this is breakfast, lunch, and possibly dinner. On the side, you're lucky, there's bread. But this isn't the soft, pillowy bread you know. This is a dense, heavy brick made from barley or rye flour, occasionally mixed with ground acorns, peas, or even sawdust to make the grain stretch further. Wheat bread exists, but it's for the wealthy. You'll see it at the Lord's table, maybe at church during communion, but never in your own home. The bread you're holding is so hard it could be used as a weapon. You don't bite into it, you gnaw at it. Some people dip it in the pottage to soften it, which helps, but also means you're now eating soggy, gritty bread that tastes like sadness. And here's the kicker, this bread might be contaminated. In wet years, rye can develop a fungus called ergot. Ergot poisoning, known in medieval times as St. Anthony's fire, causes convulsions, hallucinations, gangrene, and, sometimes, death. People didn't understand why. They just knew that some years after eating the bread, entire villages would start experiencing visions, seizures, and rotting limbs. They attributed it to sin, to demons, to God's wrath. It was actually just moldy grain, but you don't know that. So you chew your bread and hope for the best. Now, what are you drinking? Not water. Water in medieval Europe is dangerous. Rivers and streams are contaminated with waste, both human and animal. Wells can be better, but they're also prone to seepage from nearby cesspits. Drinking raw water is a gamble, and the stakes are dysentery, cholera, parasites, or worse. So instead, you drink beer. Yes, beer, at 6 in the morning. But before you imagine medieval peasants stumbling around drunk, understand this. The beer you're drinking is weak, very weak. It's called small beer or table ale, and it typically contains about 1 to 2% alcohol. The reason it's safer than water is simple. Brewing involves boiling. Boiling kills most of the bacteria and parasites that would otherwise make you violently ill. So small beer became the default beverage for everyone, adults and children alike. You're not drinking it to get tipsy. You're drinking it to survive. It tastes sour, slightly yeasty, and vaguely like old bread dissolved in water. Because that's essentially what it is. You gulp it down and try not to think about the fact that you're starting your day with warm, flat ale that's been sitting in a wooden barrel for a week. Meat? Forget it. Unless it's Sunday or a saint's feast day, you're not eating meat. Most peasants consumed meat only a handful of times per year. If you're incredibly fortunate, your family owns a pig, which will be slaughtered in late autumn and preserved with salt. That salted pork will have to last you months. It's tough, dry, and so salty it makes your mouth pucker. But it's protein, and protein is precious. Cheese exists, but it's expensive. Eggs are occasional luxuries, and even then, they're more valuable as barter items than as food. Fresh fruit? Only in season. And in season means a few brief weeks in summer and autumn when apples, pears, or berries might be available. The rest of the year, fruit is a memory. Spices? Not unless you're nobility. A pinch of black pepper costs more than most peasants earn in a month. Salt is so valuable it's kept under lock and key. Sugar is nearly mythical, imported from distant lands at ruinous cost, reserved for the tables of kings and bishops. So you sit there, in the dim light of early morning, chewing your gritty bread, spooning your mystery pottage, and sipping your sour beer. Your stomach is full, technically, but you're not satisfied. You're never satisfied. Because medieval food isn't about pleasure or flavor or nutrition, it's about not dying. And as you scrape the last bit of pottage from your bowl, you realize something. This meal, as grim as it is a victory. Because you have food today. Not everyone does, and tomorrow is never guaranteed. Chapter 4. Getting dressed and dealing with skin. Breakfast is over. Now it's time to get dressed. Except you already are dressed. Because the clothes you're wearing right now, you wore them yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. In fact, you've been wearing this same outfit for months. Welcome to medieval fashion, where your wardrobe consists of exactly one ensemble, and laundry is a semi-annual event. Let's start with the basics. You're wearing a tunic, or if you're a woman, a long linen shift. It's made of rough wool, or if you're slightly better off, a coarse linen. The fabric is scratchy, stiff, and has the texture of burlap that's been left out in the rain. There are no tags, no size labels, no care instructions. Because this garment was made by hand, either by your mother or by you, and it was designed with one goal: to cover your body. Comfort was not a consideration. Underneath, if you're fortunate, you might have a linen undertunic. If you're not fortunate, you're going commando beneath that wool, which means every step, every movement, every moment of your day involves fabric rubbing directly against your skin. And that wool? It's not soft merino. It's the kind of wool that still has bits of the sheep in it.
literally. Lanolin, dirt, small twigs, the occasional insect carcass, all woven into the fibers. Your clothes have not been washed in months. Washing them would require hauling water from a well or river, heating it over a fire, scrubbing the fabric with lye made from wood ash, rinsing it, and then hanging it to dry. This process takes an entire day, and in that day, you'd have to wear something else, which you don't have. So you don't wash your clothes. No one does, except on rare occasions. Instead, your tunic accumulates layers: sweat, dirt, food stains, smoke from the fire, blood from small cuts, mystery stains you'd rather not identify. It becomes stiff in places, shiny in others, and develops an odor that you stopped noticing weeks ago because everyone smells the same. Your shoes, if you own any, are even worse. They're made from untreated leather, stitched together with sinew, and offer about as much support as a damp sock. The soles are thin, the fit is imprecise. There's no left or right. They're identical and equally uncomfortable. Most peasants simply go barefoot, at least during warmer months. You walk through mud, through animal waste, through fields of stubble and stone. Your feet develop calluses so thick, they're practically a second shoe. But here's the real problem: your skin. Your skin hates you. And it has good reason, because you are currently hosting an entire ecosystem of parasites. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, mites. They live in your clothes, in your hair, in the straw of your mattress, in the seams of your blanket. Everyone has them. Rich, poor, clergy, nobility, everyone. There's no shame in it because there's no escape from it. You itch.
Constantly. Your scalp itches. Your armpits itch. The backs of your knees itch. Scratching provides momentary relief, followed by more itching. Sometimes you scratch so hard you break the skin, which then becomes infected, which then scabs over, which then itches even more. It's a cycle with no end. Lice are particularly problematic. Head lice live in your hair, laying eggs called nits that cling to individual strands. Body lice live in the seams of your clothing, emerging at night to feed on your blood. Removing them requires painstaking effort, combing through hair with fine-toothed combs, picking nits one by one, boiling clothes if you can spare the time and firewood. Most people don't bother. They just accept that lice are part of life, like rain or taxes. Bedbugs are worse. They hide in the cracks of your wooden bed frame, in the straw of your mattress, and emerge at night to feed. Their bites leave itchy welts that last for days. You wake up covered in them, scratching in your sleep, and there's nothing you can do. Some people tried to combat them by replacing straw regularly, or by spreading herbs like lavender or rue around the bed. It didn't work. The bedbugs always came back. Fleas jump from person to person, from animal to person, from clothing to skin. They're vectors for disease, though no one in 1325 understands that yet. They just know that fleas are annoying, persistent, and everywhere. Now let's talk about rashes. Your skin, subjected to constant irritation from rough fabric, sweat, dirt, and parasites, develops rashes. Red, inflamed patches that burn and itch simultaneously. Some of these are simple contact dermatitis. Others are fungal infections, thriving in the warm, moist environment of your unwashed clothing. Still others are scabies, caused by tiny mites burrowing under your skin to lay eggs. There's no treatment, no hydrocortisone cream, no antifungal ointment, no dermatologist to consult. You just endure. You scratch. You bleed a little. You develop scabs. You scratch those too. And through it all, you keep wearing the same clothes, sleeping in the same bed, and living the same life. Because this is normal. This is what existence looks like in 1325. So you stand up, adjust your scratchy, filthy tunic, and prepare to step outside. Your body is a battlefield, but the war isn't over. It's just beginning. Chapter 5: Dental Decay and the Smile of Death. You've made it this far into your medieval morning. You've woken up, relieved yourself, eaten something that barely qualifies as food, and gotten dressed in clothes that hate you. Now, before you head out to work, let's talk about your mouth. Specifically, let's talk about your teeth, or what's left of them. In the modern world, oral hygiene is routine. You brush twice a day with fluoride toothpaste, floss regularly, maybe use mouthwash, and visit a dentist every 6 months for a cleaning and checkup. In 1325, none of that exists. There are no toothbrushes. The concept of brushing your teeth won't become widespread for centuries. There is no toothpaste, no floss, no fluoride treatments, no dental x-rays, no gentle reminders from a hygienist about proper gum care. There is nothing. Some people, particularly the wealthy or the educated, chewed on twigs to clean their teeth. Specifically, they used twigs from trees like willow or oak, fraying the end to create a primitive brush. This helped a little, mostly by physically scraping away large chunks of food debris. But it did nothing for plaque, for bacterial buildup, for the slow, inevitable decay happening below the surface. Others rinsed their mouths with wine, vinegar, or even urine, which was believed to have cleansing properties. Spoiler, it didn't. Most people did nothing at all. They woke up, ate, worked, ate again, and went to sleep, and their teeth simply deteriorated over time. By your early 20s, your teeth are already in rough shape. Cavities are common. The medieval diet, heavy in coarse grains and hard bread, wore down enamel. And while sugar wasn't yet ubiquitous among peasants, it was creeping into the diets of the wealthy, accelerating decay among the upper classes. Nobles, ironically, often had worse teeth than peasants because they could afford imported sweets. Your gums are swollen and inflamed. Gingivitis is nearly universal. The constant presence of bacteria, combined with a complete lack of oral care, means your gums bleed easily, especially when you eat hard bread or tough meat. The bleeding doesn't hurt much anymore. You're used to it. Your breath is a weapon. Halitosis, or chronic bad breath, is so common that no one comments on it. Everyone's breath smells like rot, fermentation, and despair. Kissing, as a romantic gesture, must have required truly powerful attraction to overcome the olfactory assault. But the real problem isn't bad breath. It's pain. Toothaches are a constant, low-grade torment for much of the population. That dull, throbbing ache that radiates through your jaw and up into your skull. Some days it's manageable. Other days it's so severe you can barely think. And there's nothing you can do about it. No ibuprofen, no numbing gel, no root canal. You chew on cloves if you can get them, which have mild anesthetic properties. You pray. You drink more ale, hoping the alcohol will dull the pain. Mostly, you just endure. When a tooth becomes too damaged, too painful, too infected to ignore, you have one option: extraction. And extraction in the Middle Ages is not a gentle procedure. There are no dentists. Instead, you visit a barber surgeon. Yes, the same person who cuts your hair also pulls your teeth, performs minor surgeries, and occasionally attempts amputations. They're identifiable by the red and white striped pole outside their shop, symbolizing blood and bandages. The barber surgeon has no anesthesia to offer you. If you're lucky, they'll give you a strong drink first. If you're unlucky, they'll just tell you to bite down on a piece of leather and hold still. The tools are crude: iron pliers, hooks, sometimes just a strong grip and a forceful yank. The barber braces a knee against your chest, grips the offending tooth, and pulls. If it comes out cleanly, congratulations. You'll be in agony for a few days, but you'll survive. If it breaks, leaving fragments embedded in your jaw, you're in for a much worse time. Infection is common. Without antibiotics, even a simple tooth extraction can turn septic. Your jaw swells, fever sets in, pus oozes from the socket. And if the infection spreads to your bloodstream, it can kill you. Yes, kill you. From a toothache. Something you'd treat with a pharmacy visit today could be a death sentence in 1325. Dental abscesses, left untreated, could cause fevers that lasted weeks, wasting away your body until you simply didn't wake up one morning. There are documented cases of people dying from infected teeth, and historians estimate it was far more common than records indicate. Because when someone died of fever or swelling, the cause wasn't always recorded in detail. So you learn to live with pain. You learn to chew on one side of your mouth. You avoid cold water because it makes your teeth ache. You smile less, not because you're unhappy, but because opening your mouth wide pulls at inflamed gums. And every time you see someone older, someone in their 30s or 40s, you notice their teeth, or rather, the gaps where their teeth used to be. By middle age, many people had lost half their teeth, not to battles or accidents, but to simple, unchecked decay. So as you step out into the morning, jaw throbbing faintly, mouth tasting like old bread and bacteria, you add dental pain to the growing list of discomforts you're carrying. It's just another part of being alive in the 14th century, and the day, somehow, is still only beginning. Chapter 6. The Daily Grind, Work Without End. The sun is finally rising. Not that you've been waiting for it. You've been awake for hours already, and the day's labor is calling. If you're a peasant, and statistically you almost certainly are, your job is simple. Work the land until your body gives out. There's no office to commute to. No desk, no computer, no coffee break in the break room. There's just the field, the tools, the sun, and you. Let's be clear about what work means in 1325. You don't have a job, you have a survival obligation. You work the land that belongs to someone else, usually a lord or a church, and in exchange for that labor, you get to keep a portion of what you grow. The rest goes to your lord as rent, to the church as tithes, to the king as taxes. What's left barely feeds your family. Your tools are primitive. A wooden plow, maybe tipped with iron if you're fortunate, a sickle for harvesting grain, a hoe for breaking, up soil, a spade for digging. All of these are heavy, awkward, and brutally hard on your body. Plowing a field means walking behind an ox, if your village has one, guiding the plow through dense, root-filled soil. If there's no ox, you pull the plow yourself, or your family does, harnessed like animals. Your back bends, your shoulders scream, your hands blister and bleed. The work is relentless. In spring, you're planting seeds, carefully spacing them, praying that the weather holds. In summer, you're weeding, watering, chasing away birds and pests. In autumn, you're harvesting, racing against the first frost, working from dawn until you can no longer see. In winter, there's less field work, but that doesn't mean rest. You're repairing tools, mending fences, hauling firewood, tending to animals, and preparing for the cycle to begin again. There are no weekends. There's Sunday, which is meant for rest and worship, but even then, urgent tasks often intrude. A broken fence, a sick animal, preparing food. The idea of a 2-day weekend, of vacation days, of paid time off, is incomprehensible. You work because if you don't, you starve. It's that simple. If you're a woman, your labor is doubled. You're expected to work the fields alongside the men, planting, weeding, and harvesting. But you're also responsible for every domestic task: cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, weaving cloth, mending clothes, fetching water, which might mean walking half a mile to the nearest well or stream multiple times a day, carrying heavy buckets. caring for children, who are numerous because infant mortality is high and extra hands are always needed. Processing food, churning butter, making cheese, brewing ale, preserving what little surplus exists. You don't get to choose between field work and housework. You do both every day until you collapse into bed at night. Children start working young. By age 5 or 6, they're helping in small ways, scaring birds from the fields, collecting eggs, fetching water, watching younger siblings. By age 10, they're doing real labor, planting, harvesting, carrying loads. There's no school, no childhood as we understand it, just a gradual escalation of responsibilities until they're working full adult hours. And if you're wondering about injuries, here's the harsh truth. They're common, and they're often permanent. Cut yourself with a sickle? Hope it doesn't get infected. Sprain your ankle stepping in a hole? You'll walk with a limp forever. Herniate your back lifting something too heavy? You'll be in pain for the rest of your life. There are no workers' compensation claims, no disability benefits, no medical leave. You work through the pain, or you don't eat. Some injuries are more dramatic. Broken bones, usually from falls or accidents with animals or equipment. If the bone is set properly, which is rare, it might heal crooked. If it's not, you're crippled. Amputations happened, though not as often in agricultural work as in other professions. Lose a few fingers to frostbite or a poorly aimed axe strike, and you learn to work around it. Your productivity might drop, but you still have to work. The pace is dictated by the season and the weather. In summer, you're racing against the heat, trying to finish before midday when the sun is unbearable. In winter, you're racing against the cold, trying to finish before your fingers go numb and you can't grip your tools. There's no climate control, no shade structure, no heated barn. You endure the elements because you have no choice. And through it all, there's the knowledge that this is your life. Not for a few years until you save up enough to do something else. Forever. You were born into this labor. You will die in this labor. Your children will inherit this labor. There is no upward mobility, no career change, no retirement plan. You work until you can't, and then you become a burden on your family until you die. So you grip your wooden hoe, feel the splinters digging into your calloused palms, and you start digging. Because the field doesn't care how you feel. The field just demands. Chapter 7. Weather as Punishment. You've been working for hours now. Your back aches, your hands throb, your stomach is already starting to growl again, even though you ate just a few hours ago. And now, to make things worse, the weather is turning against you. Let's talk about climate in the Middle Ages. Not climate as an abstract concept, but as a physical, daily assault on your body. In the 21st century, weather is an inconvenience. Too hot? Turn on the air conditioning. Too cold? Adjust the thermostat. Too wet? Stay inside and watch TV. In 1325, weather is a life or death variable, and you have zero control over it. Let's start with winter. Medieval winters were brutal. We're talking about a period historians call the Little Ice Age, which began in the 14th century and lasted for centuries. Temperatures dropped, growing seasons shortened. Rivers that rarely froze became icebound for months. Your home, as we've established, offers minimal protection. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with mud, clay, and straw. They're not insulated. They're not airtight. Cold air seeps through cracks and gaps. Your roof is thatch, which provides some insulation, but also leaks and harbors pests. Your windows, if you have them, are covered with cloth or oiled parchment, not glass. They rattle in the wind. They let in drafts. The only source of heat is the fire in the center of your single room. But firewood is expensive, and in many regions, gathering it from forests is illegal without permission from the landowner. Poaching firewood could result in fines, public punishment, or worse. So you ration your fire carefully. You let it burn during cooking and for a few hours in the evening, and then you let it die down overnight, which means that by morning, your home is freezing. You wake to frost on the inside of your walls. Your breath mists in the air. The water in the bucket near the door has a thin layer of ice on top. You bundle yourself in every piece of clothing you own, which is to say, the same wool tunic you always wear, plus a cloak, if you're lucky. But the wool is damp from your body heat and the humidity, and damp wool doesn't insulate well. So, you're cold. Constantly. Bone-deep cold. Your fingers go numb. Your toes ache. Frostbite is common, especially among those who work outside all day. Lose a toe to frostbite and you'll walk with a limp. Lose several and you might not walk at all. Chilblains, painful inflammation caused by repeated exposure to cold, make your hands swell and itch. There's no treatment except waiting for warmer weather. And winter is long. Not just a few weeks of discomfort, but months of grinding cold, broken only by brief reprieves. Your body, undernourished and overworked, struggles to generate heat. You shiver constantly, burning precious calories just trying to stay warm. Now, let's jump to the opposite extreme. Summer. Surely summer is better, right? Not really. In summer, your home transforms from a freezer into an oven. The same lack of insulation that makes winter unbearable makes summer equally miserable. The sun beats down on your thatch roof, turning the interior into a sweltering, airless box. There's no fan, no cross breeze, no escaping the heat. You sweat through your clothes, but you can't take them off. Modesty standards require you to stay covered. And besides, exposing your skin means sunburn and insect bites. So you roast in your wool tunic, feeling sweat trickle down your back, under your arms, pooling in uncomfortable places. The fire still needs to be lit for cooking, which only adds to the heat. Imagine standing over a boiling pot in a room with no ventilation, in the middle of summer, wearing wool. That's your reality. Flies are everywhere. They land on your food, on your face, on open wounds. Mosquitoes swarm at dusk, biting exposed skin, leaving itchy welts. Some of them carry diseases, though no one understands why some bites lead to fever and death. Working in the fields under the summer sun is its own ordeal. There's no sunscreen, no shade structure, no water cooler. You work until you're dizzy with heat, until your vision starts to blur, until your head pounds. Heat exhaustion is common, though it's not called that. It's just called taking ill or feeling poorly. You rest for a few minutes in whatever shade you can find, drink some warm ale, and then you go back to work. Because the crops don't care if you're overheated. They need tending now or they'll fail. And if they fail, you starve. Then there's rain. In moderate amounts, rain is a blessing. But too much rain, and your crops rot in the fields. Your dirt floor turns to mud. Your thatch roof leaks, dripping water on your sleeping area, your food, your fire. Everything becomes damp and stays damp. Mold grows on your clothes, your bedding, the walls. The smell of mildew permeates everything. And if it rains for days, for weeks, during the growing season, entire harvests can be lost. Which means famine, which means death. The weather, in medieval Europe, is not a minor character in your life. It's a major one. It dictates when you work, what you grow, whether you live or die. And you have absolutely no control over it. No weather forecast to prepare you. No climate-controlled environment to retreat to. Just you, your body, and the relentless, uncaring sky. So you keep working, shivering in winter, sweating in summer, soaked in spring, and always, always aware that the weather is just one more thing trying to kill you. Chapter 8. Water, the silent killer. By now, you're thirsty. You've been working for hours under the sun, or shivering in the cold, and your body is crying out for hydration. In the modern world, this is trivial. You turn on a tap. Clean, safe water flows out. You drink. In 1325, drinking water is playing Russian roulette with your intestines. Let's talk about water. Specifically, let's talk about where it comes from and what's in it. If you live in a rural area, your water comes from a nearby stream, river, or pond. It looks clean. It flows. It's cold and refreshing. It's also full of things that want to kill you. Upstream, other villages are doing exactly what your village is doing, dumping waste into the water. Human waste from chamber pots, animal waste from livestock, runoff from fields, dead animals that fell into the water and are now decomposing, bacteria, parasites, viruses, all thriving in the medieval equivalent of an open sewer. You can't see them. Germ theory won't be discovered for another 5 centuries. You just know that sometimes, after drinking water, people get sick, and sometimes they die. Wells are safer, in theory. Digging down into the ground to access groundwater reduces contamination. But wells can still be compromised. If they're located too close to a cesspit, seepage can contaminate the water supply. If they're not properly maintained, debris, dead animals, or even human bodies can end up at the bottom. Some towns had public wells, communally maintained. Others relied on private wells, which were only as safe as the family maintaining them. Drawing water from a well is also labor-intensive. You lower a bucket on a rope, pull it up full, pour it into a larger container, and repeat, multiple times a day. If you're a woman, this is often your job. Walking to the well, drawing water, carrying heavy buckets back home, multiple trips. It's exhausting. And all that effort is for water that might still make you sick. So what do people do? They drink beer. We've covered this already, but it's worth repeating. The ale you're drinking is weak, fermented from grains, and crucially, made by boiling water. Boiling kills most pathogens, so small beer, despite its low alcohol content, is significantly safer than raw water. Children drink it. Pregnant women drink it. Everyone drinks it. Not to get drunk, but to stay alive. Wine is another option, if you can afford it. It's more common in southern Europe, where grapes grow abundantly. But for the average northern European peasant, wine is a luxury. You might taste it once or twice a year, at a feast or a holy day. The rest of the time, it's beer. Now, let's talk about bathing, or rather, the lack of it. In medieval Europe, there was a widespread belief that bathing was dangerous. Medical texts of the time warned that water could open your pores, allowing disease to enter your body. This wasn't entirely illogical. They observed that people who bathed in communal bathhouses sometimes got sick. What they didn't understand was that the water itself, shared by dozens of people, was the vector for disease. They concluded that bathing was the problem, not the unsanitary conditions. So many people simply didn't bathe at all. For months, sometimes years. They believed that a layer of dirt and oil on the skin actually protected them from illness, which, in a cruel twist, might have offered some minimal barrier against certain parasites, but did nothing to prevent disease and made everything else worse. When people did bathe, it was an event. You'd need to haul water, heat it over the fire, fill a wooden tub, and hope it didn't leak. Often the same bath water was shared by multiple family members, one after another. By the time the last person got in, the water was cold, gray, and filmy with the dirt of everyone before them. Public bathhouses existed in some towns. These were more common in the earlier Middle Ages and declined later, partly due to church disapproval. Bathhouses gained a reputation as places of sin, where men and women bathed together and other activities took place. The church cracked down on them, and many closed. So bathing became even rarer. Rainwater could be collected, but storage was a problem. Barrels left open to catch rain also collected leaves, insects, bird droppings, and whatever else fell from the sky. That water could be used for washing clothes or floors, but drinking it was risky. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Medieval people smelled. Not just a little, profoundly. They smelled of sweat, of old wool, of smoke, of animals, of unwashed bodies and unchanged clothes. It was so universal that no one noticed. Everyone smelled, so no one smelled. But every now and then, someone would get sick from the water. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid, parasites like Giardia or Cryptosporidium. Symptoms varied, but the result was often the same: severe dehydration, weakness, and death. Especially among the young, the old, or the already malnourished. Diarrheal diseases killed millions over the course of Middle Ages, and contaminated water was a leading cause. So every time you took a drink, you were taking a chance. And there was no alternative. You couldn't go to a store and buy bottled water. You couldn't install a filter. You drank what was available and hoped for the best. And if you got sick, well, we'll talk about that next. But for now, just know this. In 1325, one of the most basic human needs, hydration, was also one of the most dangerous daily acts. Water, the thing you need to survive, might be the thing that kills you. Chapter 9. Medicine. Polite torture with a theology degree. So you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just worked too hard, breathed in too much dust, or slept too close to someone who was already sick. Either way, you're not feeling well. Your stomach churns, your head pounds, your body aches. You need medical help. Unfortunately, you live in 1325, where medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. Let's start with diagnosis. Medieval medicine is based on the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These humors, inherited from ancient Greek physician Galen, are believed to govern health. When they're balanced, you're healthy. When they're out of balance, you're sick. Simple, right? The problem is that this theory is completely wrong, but no one knows that yet. So when you present with a fever, the doctor, or more likely a barber surgeon or a local healer, will assess your humors. Too much blood? You need bloodletting. Too much phlegm? You need to be purged with vomit-inducing herbs. Too much bile? Time for a powerful laxative. None of these treatments address the actual cause of your illness, because the actual cause, bacteria, viruses, parasites, is invisible and unknown. Bloodletting is the most common treatment. The logic goes, if you have too much blood, removing some will restore balance. So they cut open a vein, usually in your arm, and let blood drain into a bowl. How much? Depends on the practitioner and your symptoms. Sometimes a little, sometimes enough to make you faint. Alternatively, they might use leeches. These are medicinal leeches, kept specifically for this purpose. They're applied to your skin, where they latch on and begin sucking your blood. Once they're full, they drop off, and the wound continues to ooze for hours. Leeches are considered a gentler, more controlled form of bloodletting. They're also reused, which means they might be carrying residue from the last patient. Does bloodletting help? Rarely. In some very specific cases, removing blood can reduce blood pressure, which might provide minimal relief. But for most illnesses, it just makes you weaker. If you're already sick, losing blood doesn't help your body fight off infection. It just adds anemia to your list of problems. Purging is another favorite. If your humors are imbalanced, clearly you need to expel the excess. So you're given emetics, substances that make you vomit violently, or laxatives, which cause severe diarrhea. The theory is that you'll expel the bad humors along with everything else. In reality, you're just becoming dangerously dehydrated. If you were sick before, you're much worse now. If you have a wound, an injury, or a broken bone, you're in even more trouble. Surgery exists, but it's primitive and terrifying. There's no anesthesia, no understanding of sterilization, no antibiotics waiting on the other side. If you break a bone, the healer will try to set it, pulling and manipulating the limb until the bones align. You're awake for this. Maybe they give you strong wine or a wooden stick to bite down on. Maybe they just tell you to be brave. The pain is unimaginable. If the bone is set correctly and you're lucky, it might heal, though probably crooked. If it's not set correctly, or if infection sets in, you're looking at permanent disability or amputation. Amputation is a last resort, but it happens. A crushed limb, an infection that won't stop spreading, gangrene. The procedure is quick and brutal. A saw, a knife, extreme speed to minimize blood loss. The wound is cauterized with a hot iron, searing the flesh to stop bleeding. The smell is unforgettable. The survival rate is low. Many people die from shock during the procedure or from infection in the days that follow. Now let's talk about disease. When plague strikes, and it will, there's nothing medicine can do. The Black Death will arrive in Europe in 1347, just a couple of decades from where we are now. But even before that, there are regular outbreaks of smallpox, measles, typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Medieval doctors have theories about disease. Many believe in miasma, the idea that bad air, foul-smelling vapors carry illness. So when plague comes, they recommend avoiding strong odors, carrying herbs or flowers to ward off the bad air. Some physicians wear beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, believing it will protect them. It doesn't. Others believe disease is punishment from God, a result of sin or moral failing. So the cure involves prayer, fasting, confession, pilgrimage. If you survive, it's because God forgave you. If you die, you must have deserved it. This adds a psychological burden to physical illness. You're not just sick, you're being judged. Herbal remedies do exist, and some of them have genuine medicinal properties. Willow bark, which contains a compound similar to aspirin, was used for pain and fever. Honey was applied to wounds for its antibacterial properties, though no one understood why it worked. Garlic, ginger, various plants and roots were prepared in tinctures and poultices. Some helped, many didn't. But at least they usually didn't make things actively worse, unlike bloodletting. If your condition deteriorates, if you develop a high fever, if you start slipping in and out of consciousness, the physician gives up on medicine and calls for a priest. Last rites are administered. Your family gathers. You're expected to confess your sins, make peace with God, and prepare to die. Sometimes people recover anyway, which is attributed to divine intervention or a particularly skilled healer. More often, they don't. And here's the thing that makes all of this even more tragic. Many of the illnesses that killed medieval people are easily treatable today. A simple bacterial infection? Antibiotics. Severe dehydration from dysentery? IV fluids. A broken bone? Set it properly with anesthesia and pain management. Monitor for infection. But in 1325, those options don't exist. So people suffer, unnecessarily and horribly, and die from things that would barely qualify as medical emergencies in the modern world. You, lying on your straw mattress, sweating through your fever, can only hope that whatever's wrong with you resolves on its own, because the cure might very well kill you faster than the disease. Chapter 10. Dinner. The meal that might kill you. You've survived the day. Barely. Your body aches from labor. Your head throbs from dehydration and possibly the beginnings of illness. Your hands are raw and blistered. The sun is setting, and it's time for the evening meal. Surely, after a day this hard, there's something good to eat. There isn't. Dinner in medieval Europe is remarkably similar to breakfast. Bland, questionable, and potentially lethal. You're back to the pottage. That same pot has been simmering all day, and now new ingredients have been added. Maybe some wild greens your mother gathered from the hedgerow. Maybe a turnip, if the harvest was decent. On a good day, perhaps a small piece of salted pork, though that's rare. The pottage has thickened, taken on new layers of flavor, which is to say it now tastes like boiled sadness with undertones of smoke. You eat it anyway. It's hot. It fills your stomach. That's the best you can hope for. Bread makes another appearance, just as hard as it was this morning. You dip it in the pottage to soften it, and try not to think about the grit between your teeth. That grit isn't just texture. It's actual stone particles from the millstone used to grind the grain. Eating medieval bread gradually wears down your tooth enamel, contributing to the dental decay we discussed earlier. So every meal is slowly destroying your teeth. But what choice do you have? Now, let's talk about food preservation, or rather, the desperate attempt at it. You can't refrigerate food. You can't freeze it. You have three options: salt it, smoke it, or eat it immediately. Salting works well for meat and fish, drawing out moisture and inhibiting bacterial growth. But salt is expensive, so you use as little as possible, which means the preservation isn't always complete. Salted meat can last months, but it's tough, dry, and so salty it makes your mouth pucker. You have to soak it in water before cooking to make it remotely edible. Smoking meat is another option. Hang it in the chimney or over a smoky fire for days, and it develops a hard outer coating that protects the interior. Smoked meat tastes better than salted, but it's still tough and requires long cooking to become chewable. Fresh meat is a luxury. When an animal is slaughtered, usually in late autumn, the entire community often shares because no one can eat an entire pig or cow before it spoils. You eat fresh meat for a few days, salt or smoke the rest, and then you don't see fresh meat again until the next slaughter. Fish, if you live near water, is more common, but it spoils quickly. By the time it reaches inland markets, it's often on the verge of rot. You learn to recognize the smell of fish that's about to turn, and you eat it anyway because protein is protein. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils within hours in warm weather. You can make cheese, which lasts longer, but the process requires skill, time, and rennet, which comes from the stomach lining of a calf. Cheese is valuable, often more valuable than the milk itself, so it's sold or bartered rather than consumed at home. Butter keeps a bit longer, especially if salted, but it often goes rancid. Rancid butter has a sharp, unpleasant taste and can cause stomach upset. You use it anyway because wasting food is not an option. Eggs, when available, are eaten fresh or preserved in various ways. Some people covered them in fat or beeswax to seal the shell. Others packed them in salt or ash. These methods worked, sort of, but preserved eggs developed a sulfurous taste and rubbery texture. Then there's the issue of spoilage you don't see. Ergot, the fungus that grows on rye, has already been mentioned. It causes hallucinations, convulsions, and in severe cases, gangrene that turns your extremities black and causes them to fall off. Entire villages would be affected in bad years, experiencing collective madness and terror. They called it St. Anthony's fire and believed it was divine punishment. It was just contaminated grain. Other fungi and molds grow on stored food, especially in damp conditions. You eat moldy bread because throwing it away means going hungry. Some molds are harmless. Others cause vomiting, diarrhea, or long-term organ damage. You never know which until it's too late. Now let's talk about what you're not eating: vegetables and fruit. The medieval diet is heavily grain-based. Vegetables exist, but fresh ones are only available in season. Cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, carrots. These are your options. And outside of the growing season, you have none of them unless you've managed to store some in a root cellar. Root cellars, basically pits dug into the earth, provide cool, dark storage. But they're also damp, and vegetables stored there often sprout, rot, or become homes for rodents. Fruit is even more seasonal. Apples, pears, berries, plums, available for a few brief weeks and then gone. Some people dry fruit, but that requires time and good weather. Most fruit is eaten fresh, fermented into alcohol, or it rots. The lack of fresh produce means vitamin deficiencies are common. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, affects many people by late winter when fresh food has been gone for months. Your gums bleed more, your skin bruises easily. You feel weak and lethargic. By spring, when fresh greens start appearing, you eat them voraciously and your symptoms improve. But you don't understand why. You just know that spring greens make you feel better, so you look forward to them. Poaching is a constant temptation. The forests around your village are full of game, rabbits, deer, wild boar, but they belong to the Lord. Hunting without permission is poaching, and it's a serious crime. Punishments range from fines you can't afford, to whipping, to having your hand cut off, to execution. Is it worth risking your life for a rabbit? When your children are hungry? Sometimes it is. Some people take the risk. They set snares at night, hoping to catch something small. If they're successful and don't get caught, the family eats meat. If they're caught, the consequences are severe. So you sit by the fire, eating your pottage, chewing your rock-hard bread, and you're grateful. Not because the food is good, but because there is food. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. The harvest could fail. The Lord could demand more. Disease could strike the livestock. So tonight, you eat what you have, and you try not to think about how hungry you'll be in an hour. Chapter 11. Religion, your spiritual landlord. The meal is finished. The fire is dying down. But before you can even think about sleep, there's one more obligation: evening prayers. In medieval Europe, religion isn't optional. It's not a once-a-week commitment or a personal choice. It's the organizing principle of your entire existence. The church controls your time, your behavior, your thoughts, and ultimately your fate. Let's talk about the rhythm of your day. It's structured entirely around the church bells. These bells ring throughout the day, marking the hours for prayer. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. You don't need to attend all of these. Those are primarily for monks and clergy. But you hear them, and they dictate your schedule. Wake at dawn for prime. Stop for midday prayer at sext. Evening prayer at vespers. The bells tell you when to work, when to rest, when to pray. You have no clock, no watch, no independent way of tracking time. The church owns time, and you live by its schedule. Sunday is the Lord's Day, and attendance at Mass is mandatory. Not optional, mandatory. Missing Mass without a valid reason is a sin, and the community notices. If you're absent, people talk. The priest might visit your home to ask why. Your neighbors will judge you. And if you're repeatedly absent, you could face public penance or other consequences. So every Sunday, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much work is waiting, you go to church. The service is conducted entirely in Latin. You don't speak Latin. No one you know speaks Latin, except the priest. So you stand there or kneel for hours, listening to words you don't understand. You recognize certain phrases from repetition. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. But the deeper meaning, the actual content of the scripture being read, is completely inaccessible to you. This is intentional. The church maintains that scripture is too complex, too sacred for lay people to interpret on their own. You need the priest to tell you what God wants. And what God wants, conveniently, often aligns with what the church and the nobility want. Obedience, humility, acceptance of your place in the social order. You're told that your suffering in this life is temporary, that the true reward comes in heaven. The rich are rich because God willed it. You're poor because God willed it. Questioning this is heresy. Tithes are non-negotiable. A tenth of everything you produce goes to the church. Grain, livestock, eggs, wool, whatever you have. You don't get to choose whether to pay. It's extracted systematically. The church needs these tithes to maintain itself, to pay its clergy, to build its cathedrals, to fund its operations. And you, already struggling to feed your family, must give up a tenth of your meager harvest. On top of what you owe the Lord, on top of what you need to survive. The math often doesn't work out. But the church insists, and you comply, because the alternative is spiritual damnation. Speaking of damnation, hell is very, very real to you. Not as an abstract concept, but as a vivid, terrifying destination. Priests describe it in exquisite detail during sermons. Lakes of fire, rivers of boiling blood, demons with iron hooks pulling sinners apart, eternal screaming, eternal burning, eternal torment. And the bar for getting into hell is surprisingly low. Miss Mass? Sin. Eat meat on Friday? Sin. Have impure thoughts? Sin. Fail to confess? Sin. Lie, cheat, steal, gossip, any of it can land you in hell. And since you're human, you sin constantly, which means you live in perpetual fear of damnation. The only remedy is confession. You must regularly confess your sins to a priest who will assign penance, prayers to recite, fasts to observe, acts of charity to perform. This gives the church enormous power over your private life. The priest knows your secrets, your failings, your fears, and that information can be used, subtly or not, to enforce behavior. Holy days are frequent. In addition to Sundays, there are dozens of saints' feast days throughout the year. Some are major: Christmas, Easter, Pentecost. Others are local, celebrating regional saints. On these days, you're expected to stop work and attend services. This sounds like a break, and in some ways it is, but it's not leisure time. It's worship time. You spend hours in church, listening to Latin, kneeling on hard floors, performing rituals you only partially understand. The church also controls major life events. Birth. Your child is baptized immediately, often within days, because an unbaptized baby who dies cannot enter heaven. Marriage. Performed by a priest, sanctified by the church, binding before God and community. Death. Last rites administered, burial in consecrated ground, prayers for your soul. Without the church's blessing, these milestones are incomplete, invalid, even dangerous. And here's the thing: most people genuinely believe. This isn't just oppression from above. For many, faith provides comfort. The promise of heaven makes earthly suffering bearable. The community of the church offers connection, ritual, meaning. Saints are prayed to for intercession. Saint Anthony for lost items, Saint Jude for hopeless causes, Saint Sebastian for protection from plague. Miracles are believed in, reported, celebrated. Relics, fragments of saints' bones or clothing, are venerated and thought to have healing powers. Faith is woven into every aspect of life, inseparable from daily existence. But the cost is autonomy. You don't choose your beliefs. You don't interpret Scripture yourself. You don't question the priest, the bishop, the pope. You obey, you tithe, you pray, and you hope that when you die, you've done enough to avoid hell. And right now, as you kneel by the dying fire and murmur your evening prayers, you're exhausted. Your body hurts. Your stomach is never quite full. Your future is uncertain. But you pray anyway, because in 1325, God is always watching, and so is everyone else. Chapter 12. Life as a Medieval Woman. Everything we've discussed so far applies to women. The filth, the labor, the hunger, the cold, the disease, the fear. Women experience all of it, but they also experience additional layers of hardship, danger, and oppression that men simply don't face. Let's start with the most basic fact. You have no legal identity. As a woman in medieval Europe, you are legally covered, meaning you exist under the legal authority of a man. First, your father, then your husband. You cannot own property in your own name in most regions. You cannot enter into contracts. You cannot testify in many legal proceedings. You are, in the eyes of the law, a perpetual minor. Marriage is not a choice. It's an arrangement, typically made by your father, designed to benefit the family through alliances, land consolidation, or financial exchange. You might be betrothed as a child, sometimes as young as 7 or 8, though consummation typically waits until puberty. By your early teens, you're expected to marry and begin producing children. Your wedding night is not romantic. It's a duty, often painful, and carries immediate risks. Because pregnancy in medieval Europe is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to you. Let's talk about childbirth. There is no prenatal care, no ultrasounds, no vitamins, no monitoring of fetal development. You continue working throughout pregnancy, hauling water and tending fields because there's no such thing as maternity leave. When labor begins, you're attended by a midwife, a woman with experience but no formal medical training. She has no surgical tools, no anesthesia, no ability to perform a cesarean section. If the baby is positioned incorrectly, if labor stalls, if complications arise, there's very little she can do. You labor for hours, sometimes days, in excruciating pain. Other women from the community might be present, holding your hands, offering encouragement, praying. But ultimately, you're on your own. Many women die in childbirth. Hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labor, eclampsia, any of these can kill you. And if you survive but the baby doesn't, you're expected to grieve briefly and then get pregnant again as soon as possible. If the baby survives but you're injured, torn, suffering from fistulas or prolapse, you live with those injuries for the rest of your life. There's no reconstructive surgery, no physical therapy, just chronic pain and dysfunction. And then, you get pregnant again. And again. Women in medieval Europe often went through 6, 8, 10 pregnancies. Not all of them resulted in live births. Miscarriages were common, often due to malnutrition, overwork, or stress. Stillbirths happened frequently. Infant mortality was so high that roughly half of all children died before age 5. So you might give birth 10 times and raise 4 children to adulthood. Each pregnancy risked your life. Each birth was a gauntlet. And through it all, you were still expected to maintain the household. Cooking, cleaning, spinning, weaving, brewing, caring for animals, tending gardens, raising children. Your work was never done. If your husband was abusive, and many were, you had no recourse. Domestic violence was not only legal, it was encouraged. Husbands were expected to discipline their wives, to keep them obedient and submissive. Church teachings reinforced this. Women were considered morally weaker, more susceptible to sin, descendants of Eve who brought sin into the world. You were told to be silent, obedient, modest, and grateful for your husband's guidance. If you spoke out, if you defied him, punishment was socially acceptable. Beating your wife, within reason, was seen as a man's right and responsibility. If you sought help from the church or community, you'd likely be told to submit, to pray, to be a better wife. Now let's talk about witchcraft accusations. This becomes more prominent in later centuries, but the roots are here in the medieval period. Women, especially those who were different, were vulnerable. Widows who inherited property, midwives with herbal knowledge, women who were outspoken or unmarried or simply disliked by their neighbors. Any of them could be accused of witchcraft. The accusation alone was dangerous. Trials often involved torture to extract confessions. Trial by ordeal, being thrown into water to see if you floated, guilty, or sank, innocent but drowned. If you were found guilty, execution followed, burning, hanging, or drowning. The fear of accusation kept women compliant. Don't be too knowledgeable. Don't be too confident. Don't challenge men. Don't stand out. Blend in. Submit. Survive. Education was almost entirely unavailable. Literacy was rare among men, and even rarer among women. Unless you were born into nobility and sent to a convent, you would never learn to read. You'd never have access to books, to ideas, to the written word. Your world was confined to your village, your family, your labor. There were exceptions, of course. Some women became nuns, which offered an alternative to marriage. Convent life was still restrictive, still hierarchical, but it provided safety, community, and sometimes education. A few women, particularly noble women, wielded significant power through marriage alliances or widowhood, but these were rare. For the vast majority of women, life was a cycle of submission, labor, childbearing, and survival. And yet, women endured. They found ways to support each other. Childbirth was a communal event, with experienced women helping the new mother. Work was often done together, spinning circles where women gathered to work and talk. Friendships formed, bonds strengthened. Women passed down knowledge, herbal remedies, practical skills, survival strategies. They sang while they worked. They told stories. They found moments of joy in a brutal existence. Because humans are resilient. Even when the world is designed to break you, you find ways to keep going. But make no mistake, being a woman in 1325 meant facing every hardship men faced, plus an additional layer of vulnerability, violence, and systemic oppression. And you had no choice but to endure it. Chapter 13. Violence, Crime, and Justice. We've talked about disease, hunger, and hardship, but there's another constant threat in medieval life: violence. The Middle Ages were not peaceful, not for the nobility waging wars, and certainly not for commoners just trying to survive. Violence was woven into the fabric of daily existence, and justice, when it came, was brutal and public. Let's start with the basic reality. Law and order, as we understand it, barely exists. There are no police, no investigators, no forensic teams, no Miranda rights. If someone wrongs you, you seek justice through your lord, through the church, or through your own means. And often, your own means is the only option. Theft is common because people are desperate. Steal a loaf of bread because your children are starving? If you're caught, the punishment is severe. In many regions, theft could be punished by cutting off a hand. This wasn't metaphorical. A public executioner would literally amputate your hand with an axe or a cleaver, cauterizing the wound with hot iron to prevent immediate death from blood loss. You'd survive, maimed, and now even less able to support yourself. For more serious crimes, execution was standard. Hanging was the most common method for commoners: quick, cheap, effective. The condemned was led to a gallows, usually in the town square, with a crowd gathered to watch. A noose was placed around the neck, and then they were pushed off a ladder or platform. If they were fortunate, the neck broke immediately and death was quick. If not, they strangled slowly, kicking and gasping, for several minutes. Beheading was reserved for nobility. It was considered a more honorable death. A skilled executioner could do it in one clean stroke. An unskilled one might require multiple blows. Burning was used for heretics, witches, and sometimes for particularly heinous crimes. The condemned was tied to a stake, wood piled around them, and set alight. Death came from smoke inhalation or burning, depending on how the fire was set. It was meant to be a deterrent, a spectacle, a warning. These executions were public events. People gathered to watch, sometimes bringing food, treating it like entertainment. Children were brought to witness, to learn about consequences. It was brutal, but it was normalized. Trial by ordeal was still practiced in many regions during this period. The logic was simple. God would protect the innocent and expose the guilty. Several methods existed. Trial by hot iron. You carried a red-hot iron bar for a set distance. Your hand was then bandaged. 3 days later, the bandage was removed. If the wound was healing cleanly, you were innocent. If it was infected, you were guilty. Trial by hot water. You plunged your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. Same logic. Same inspection after 3 days. Trial by cold water. You were bound and thrown into a body of water. If you sank, you were innocent and hopefully rescued before drowning. If you floated, you were guilty, because pure water rejected the impure sinner. These methods seem insane to modern sensibilities, but in a world where evidence was hard to gather and lies were easy, people believed divine judgment was the only reliable arbiter. Domestic violence, as we've discussed, was legal and expected. A man could beat his wife, his children, his servants, and face no legal consequences as long as he didn't kill them. And even if he did, punishments were often light if it was considered an accident or the result of justified discipline. Street violence was common. Arguments escalated into fist fights, knife fights, sometimes fatal brawls. Alcohol, consumed throughout the day, lowered inhibitions. Honor was fiercely protected, and insults could lead to bloodshed. Someone insults your family? You defend your honor, violently if necessary. Someone cheats you in a trade? You confront them, and it might come to blows. The local lord's men, or the church, might intervene if things got too out of hand. But often, disputes were settled between the parties involved, with community mediation or through violence. Feuds between families could last generations. A wrong done decades ago would be remembered, and vengeance would be sought. Blood feuds resulted in cycles of violence, each killing prompting a retaliatory killing, on and on. Some regions had systems for paying blood money, compensation to the victim's family to settle the matter without further violence. But these systems were inconsistent and often ignored. War was a constant backdrop, not necessarily affecting your village directly every year, but always present. Lords fought each other over land, over insults, over inheritance disputes. Kings waged wars of conquest. The Crusades sent waves of soldiers east, disrupting economies and spreading disease. If war came to your region, you suffered. Armies didn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. Soldiers raided farms, stole food and livestock, burned crops, assaulted women. You had no rights, no protection. If you were in the way, you were collateral damage. Banditry was a persistent problem. Roads were dangerous. Traveling merchants, pilgrims, anyone moving between towns risked being ambushed by outlaws. These weren't romantic Robin Hood figures. They were desperate, often violent men who robbed and sometimes killed travelers. Forests, in particular, were lawless spaces. The king's law applied in towns and on major roads, but once you entered the woods, you were on your own. Outlaws lived there, beyond the reach of authority, surviving by theft and violence. And through all of this, there was the understanding that life was cheap. Death was common. Disease, accident, violence, any of them could end you without warning. Justice, when it came, was swift and harsh, designed to deter through fear rather than rehabilitate. You learned to keep your head down, avoid conflict, and hope you never ended up on the wrong side of someone powerful. Because in 1325, might often made right, and the legal system, such as it was, favored those with power, land, and connections. If you had none of those things, you had very little protection at all. Chapter 14. Death comes early and often. By now, you've survived a full day in medieval Europe. You've woken in filth, worked until your body screamed, eaten barely enough to sustain yourself, and avoided the numerous threats lurking around every corner. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people in 1325 don't get to do this for very long. Life expectancy in medieval Europe is often cited as 30 to 40 years, but that number is misleading. It's an average, and it's dragged down dramatically by infant and child mortality. Let's talk about childhood first. If you're born in 1325, your chances of survival are roughly 50 to 50 before you reach your 5th birthday. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, any of these could kill you. Infants died from infections, from complications at birth, from simple inability to thrive in harsh conditions. Children died from fevers, from diarrheal diseases, from falls, from drowning, from burns. Families expected to lose children. It wasn't unusual to have 8 births and raise 4 children. This created a strange emotional calculus. Parents loved their children, but they also guarded their hearts, knowing loss was probable. Some historians suggest medieval parents were emotionally distant from young children as a protective mechanism. Others argue they grieved just as deeply as any parent would, but had to carry on because survival demanded it. Probably both are true, varying by individual and circumstance. But here's the important part. If you survived childhood, your life expectancy improved dramatically. Make it to age 10, and you might live into your 50s or even 60s. Not guaranteed, but possible. The average of 30 to 40 reflects the huge number of children who died young. It doesn't mean everyone dropped dead at 35. Still, even if you survived childhood, the medieval world offered countless ways to die prematurely. Disease was the biggest killer. We've mentioned this repeatedly, but it's worth emphasizing. Infections that are trivial today were fatal then. A cut that gets infected, a tooth abscess, pneumonia, dysentery, tuberculosis, any of these could kill you, and all of them were common. Plague would become the most infamous killer in medieval Europe. The Black Death, arriving in 1347, would kill roughly 1/3 of Europe's population in just a few years. But even before that, there were regular outbreaks of disease that swept through communities. Smallpox, measles, typhus, cholera, influenza. No immunity, no treatment, just waves of death. Famine was another major killer. Bad weather, crop failure, pests, any disruption to the food supply meant starvation. And starvation didn't happen quickly. It was a slow decline. Weakness, lethargy, immune system failure, eventually organ shutdown. Children and the elderly died first, then the sick, the weak. Finally, even healthy adults succumbed. Entire villages could be decimated by a single bad harvest. Childbirth, as we've discussed, was extraordinarily dangerous for women. Maternal mortality rates were high. Many women died in their teens or 20s, giving birth to their second or third child. This was so common that it was simply an accepted risk of being a woman. You hoped you'd survive. You prayed, but you knew it might end this way. Accidents were frequent. Working with primitive tools around open fires near large animals, all of it carried risk. Falls from ladders, from roofs, while climbing trees. Drowning, both in accidents and in trials by ordeal. Burns, from cooking fires or house fires that spread quickly through thatched roofs. Crushing injuries from collapsed structures or accidents involving carts and livestock. Most of these were permanently disabling or fatal because medical intervention was so limited. Violence, as we just discussed, also claimed lives regularly. Fights, executions, warfare, banditry. Men were more likely to die from violence, but women weren't immune. And then there was simple exhaustion. Working from childhood until death, never quite eating enough, living in filth and cold, dealing with constant pain and illness. Your body wore out. By your 40s, if you made it that far, you were old. Your spine curved. Your joints were arthritic. Your teeth were mostly gone. Your vision was failing. You looked and felt decades older than a modern 40-year-old. And one day, you simply didn't wake up. Or you developed a fever that didn't break. Or you had an accident that, in your weakened state, proved fatal. Death, when it came, was usually at home. You died in the same bed where you slept every night, surrounded by family if you were fortunate. A priest might be summoned to administer last rites, to hear your final confession, to bless your soul. You'd try to say goodbye, to make peace, to prepare for whatever came next. And then you'd slip away. Burial happened quickly, usually within a day or two. Bodies decomposed fast, especially in warm weather, and there was no embalming. If you were a member of the church, or if your family could afford it, you might be buried in the churchyard, in consecrated ground. This was important because Christian belief held that only those buried in holy ground had a chance at resurrection. A grave was dug, often shallow due to rocky soil or high water tables. Your body was wrapped in a shroud, a simple cloth, because coffins were expensive and rare. You were lowered into the earth. A priest said prayers in Latin. Dirt was shoveled over you. A simple wooden cross might mark the spot, though these rotted away quickly. Within a generation or two, your grave might be forgotten, your bones disturbed by new burials in the same crowded churchyard. If you were poor, excommunicated, or died by suicide, you might be buried outside the churchyard in unconsecrated ground. This was considered a terrible fate, implying your soul was damned. Grief was real, but had to be managed. Families mourned, but they also had to continue working, continue surviving. There was no extended bereavement leave, no grief counseling, just the expectation that you'd carry on. And you did. Because in medieval Europe, death was so common it became almost mundane. Every family had lost children, siblings, parents, spouses. You lived with the constant awareness that you could be next. That awareness shaped how people lived. Some found comfort in religion, in the promise of heaven and reunion with lost loved ones. Others simply became hardened, accepting death as inevitable and unavoidable. But through it all, people kept going. They had children, knowing they might lose them. They formed bonds, knowing they might be broken. They built lives, knowing those lives could end at any moment. Not because they were naive or hopeless, but because the alternative, giving up, wasn't an option. And tonight, as you lie down on your straw mattress, exhausted and aching, you don't think about all the ways you could die. You just close your eyes and hope you wake up tomorrow. Because that's all anyone in 1325 can do. Chapter 15. The Dream That Dies. So, you've made it through. A full day, sunrise to sunset, in the year 1325. You woke in filth. You endured discomfort, hunger, pain, fear, and unrelenting labor. And now, as night falls completely and you prepare for sleep, you might be wondering, how did people live like this? How did they endure day after day, year after year? The answer is both simple and profound. They didn't know anything different. For someone born in medieval Europe, this was life. This was normal. There was no memory of indoor plumbing, of antibiotics, of human rights. There was no concept that life could be fundamentally different, easier, safer, cleaner. You knew intellectually that nobles lived better than you. They had stone houses, more food, finer clothes. But even their lives, by modern standards, were harsh. Castles were cold, drafty, and infested with pests. Nobles died from the same diseases, suffered the same dental decay, lived with the same parasites. They just did it in slightly more comfortable surroundings. The romanticized version of the Middle Ages that we see in movies and fantasy novels never existed. There were no gallant knights rescuing damsels in distress, no feasts overflowing with roasted meat and fresh fruit, no clean, orderly villages with cheerful peasants singing while they worked. Real medieval life was gritty, brutal, and unfair. It was dominated by hierarchy, where your birth determined your destiny. If you were born a serf, you died a serf. If you were born into nobility, you had advantages. But you were also trapped in a system of obligations, alliances, and violence. The church controlled thought and behavior. The nobility controlled land and labor. And everyone else simply tried to survive within that system. There was no democracy, no social mobility, no sense that an individual's voice mattered. You were a cog in a machine, and the machine ground you down slowly and inevitably. And yet, despite all of this, people still laughed. They still sang songs while they worked. They still told stories by the fire, passing down legends and folklore. They still fell in love, celebrated marriages, mourned losses, and found meaning in community and family. They still looked at a sunrise and felt something, even if they couldn't name it. They still played simple games, celebrated feast days, found joy in small pleasures, a good harvest, a healthy child, a rare day without pain. Humans are astonishingly resilient. Even in the darkest circumstances, we find ways to keep going, to create pockets of light, to connect with each other. Medieval people weren't fundamentally different from us. They had the same capacity for hope, fear, love, anger, and wonder. They just had to exercise that capacity in conditions we can barely imagine. So tonight, as you sit in your modern home, with clean water flowing from taps, with food in your refrigerator, with heating and cooling systems keeping you comfortable, take a moment to appreciate it. Not with guilt, but with genuine gratitude. Because your ancestors, whether literal or cultural, fought through the medieval world so that eventually, centuries later, you wouldn't have to. They endured plagues, famines, violence, oppression. They worked fields until their bodies broke. They bore children knowing they might not survive. They lived with pain, fear, and uncertainty as constant companions. And they kept going. Generation after generation, slowly, imperceptibly, things improved. Knowledge accumulated. Technologies developed. Systems evolved. It took centuries, and there were many setbacks, but eventually, humanity clawed its way out of the medieval darkness into something resembling the modern world. You are the beneficiary of that long, painful struggle. So when you turn on a light with a simple switch, remember that your ancestors lived and died in darkness. When you visit a doctor and receive effective treatment, remember that your ancestors died from infected splinters. When you drink clean water, remember that your ancestors risked death with every sip. When you vote, speak freely, or choose your own path, remember that your ancestors had none of those freedoms. None of this is meant to minimize modern struggles. Life today has its own challenges, its own injustices, its own sources of suffering. But perspective matters. And the perspective of spending even one day in medieval Europe makes clear just how far we've come. So tonight, as you lie down in your clean bed, with your washed sheets and comfortable pillow, with antibiotics in your medicine cabinet, and food in your kitchen, and a toilet that flushes just down the hall, maybe whisper a small thank you to progress, to science, to all the countless humans who worked, suffered, and innovated so that life could be better for those who came after. And then sleep peacefully. Because you don't have to wake up in 1325. You get to wake up here, now, where a bad day might mean traffic, or a difficult meeting, or an argument with a loved one. Not starvation, or plague, or lice, or cesspits. The medieval world was real, and it was terrible. But it's over. And you're safe. For tonight at least, that's enough. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a single day in the Middle Ages. I hope it's given you some perspective, maybe even some strange comfort as you drift off to sleep. If you enjoyed this exploration, feel free to subscribe. And if you have suggestions for future topics, leave them in the comments below. Until next time, sleep well. And be grateful you're sleeping now, not then.